This is an installation video of the MCARBO trigger spring kit for the Mossberg 702 Plinkster. Before we begin, let's get a stock reading of the trigger pull. £5 10 ounces. Let's take a second reading. £6 1 ounce. For the installation of the MCARBO trigger spring kit into the Mossberg 702 Plinkster, here are some of the items you're going to need. You're going to need a hammer, you're going to need safety glasses, you're going to need pliers of some kind. These are bent, which can be useful. A dental pick or something that will help you. A small punch and a medium punch, Phillips head screwdriver, and a flathead screwdriver. And of course, the MCARBO trigger spring kit, which is available at www.mcarbo.com or eBay or Amazon. Before we begin the installation, let's make sure this firearm is clear. Remove the magazine. Charge the bolt back, check the bolt face. If there's anything inside the chamber, which there is a snap cap, remove it. Then check the magazine well. All three positions are clear. This firearm is clear. First step is to remove these two bolts that hold the receiver to the stock. Push down on the trigger assembly while holding on to the stock. Set the stock aside. You'll notice that the receiver, trigger assembly, and the barrel are all one piece at this point. We need to remove these two pins right here. So if you have two pieces of wood, this will help. Now you'll notice that there's a smooth end and then there's a deformed end on these pins. You want to tap on the smooth end toward the deformed end. So tapping on the smooth end with our medium-sized punch and hammer. Next, we'll remove the trigger assembly. Start by pulling on the front near the magazine well. Move the charging handle. And slide back. You should feel the bolt sliding back and lift up. It'll all come out as one unit. Remove the remaining pieces, the buffer, and the guide rod. Set the receiver and the barrel aside for a moment. Take your trigger assembly, remove the bolt. It'll just slide right off of the guide. Remove the recoil spring. Notice that there is a deformed end and a smooth end as well on these pins. Tap on the smooth end, pushing the deformed end out. The idea is not to push the deformed end all the way through this plastic trigger assembly. Take your small punch, start with this left one, the top left. So in relation to the trigger and the safety, it's the top left when your magazine well is on the left side. Now, release the hammer by pulling on the trigger. This will release tension on the hammer spring and allow a much easier disassembly. Push the second pin out, which is located in the middle of these 3 pins. Keep your finger on top of the hammer and slide it out. Hammer spring, hammer strut, hammer. Now these pieces are held in inside the trigger assembly loosely. They basically just stay in there because they are the exact width of the trigger assembly, and they just rest in there. So don't be nervous when you see these pins just fall out. I'll show you how to put them back together. The next portion of this is getting the trigger mechanism out. Remove the third pin, the trigger hinge pin, by tapping on the smooth end out. Keep your finger over the assembly just in case parts go flying. As you notice, they're under tension, and they would have had I not had my finger over it. Some pins will fall out as we pull this trigger out. So here is the plastic trigger housing. Set that aside. Now the trick is keeping your fingers on those pins will hold it all in place. Here's a view of what it's supposed to look like inside the actual trigger housing. Okay, so pull the trigger out, set that aside. Now this is the sear spring that we want to replace. So grab your MCARBO trigger spring kit and remove the spring. Simply shake it, it'll fall apart. Remove the stock spring, keep them separated so you don't get them confused. Now install MCARBO spring. Notice that when installing this spring, the bend in the sear spring is back here in this wide open middle section. So if you're looking at it in this direction, this little ski part is towards this side, the smoother side. The other rounded bend is towards this angled side. Always keep your thumb behind these little pins. As you'll notice, they're very frustrating, but that all can be alleviated by just keeping your thumb behind it. So this is how it looks. It's a simple change of a sear spring. When we install it, we're going to want to keep tension like this on the sear spring. This is how it's going to go in. This is the idea. Okay, so we've changed springs. Take your plastic trigger assembly. Now, holding on to that pin so that it doesn't fall out, drop it straight in to the trigger assembly, grabbing that ski at the bottom of the assembly and pushing down. You want to maintain pressure. A really good trick is to take your flathead screwdriver, lay it on top to maintain equal pressure, and slide it all the way forward. There's even a notch there where the hammer strut fits into the trigger assembly, and you can use it as a point of leverage. Now, this is one of the hardest parts, so it'll test your patience, but if you use this trick, it'll likely go fairly quickly. Take your small punch and grab that hole. If you can just barely see it, straighten it up. Take your pin, and get your pin started. You may have to back the pin off a little bit if you went too far with it. Get it flush so that it's still holding that piece in. Take your trigger, drop it straight in. Push down on that pin, a block of wood. If the holes still aren't lining up, stick your small punch in and manipulate those holes so that they line up appropriately, and then continue pushing on that pin by pressing against the block of wood. Okay? It should rock like this. See that internal rocking motion? Now, let's put the hammer back together. So take notice, this little notched end is at the back. Take notice of that. Take your little pin, stick it right in there. Holding on the pin on both sides, stick your hammer spring back on the hammer strut. Take your plastic trigger housing and slowly drop it. You'll see there's a hole down here. You're going to drop your hammer strut with the hammer spring right into that hole. And then line up this hole, this middle hole, with the actual hammer. It's going to require you to push forward until you can see that hole. Take your smooth end and insert that first. And I just push it right in. Okay, let's test it out. That's what we want. Now that last remaining pin, it just sits in there. It doesn't even hold anything in place. So just insert the smooth in first. A little tap. Plastic trigger assembly is back together. Hammer down first on this trigger assembly. Put your bolt, just slide it right on. And you have to push down on that hammer. See that? Push down that hammer and slide your bolt forward. Now turn it around and just set it down for a second. Grab your receiver. If this guide rod fell out, go ahead and reinsert it. This is what the recoil spring will ride over. You'll just remove this little follower, you push it back. You'll stick it in the hole. You have your pliers, slide the follower into the hole. It'll stay right in place. Next, take your complete trigger assembly, put the recoil spring, line that up with the guide rod. Get it on the guide rod. Now, you may have to pull up on the back end as you're pushing on the front. This will keep it from binding. You want to reduce that angle as much as possible back here. Otherwise, you could chance bending your recoil spring. Pull up on the back as you're pushing forward. Insert your buffer next. Follows the contour of the receiver. You'll see that it fits fleshly in between the plastic trigger assembly, and your pin will hold it in place. So get that rear pin in halfway at least, and pull up a little bit on the front, and you put your bolt charging handle back in. Alright. Reinsert the front pin, smooth side first. Okay, tap them in. Okay, now you can see that our trigger assembly, our receiver, our barrel are all back in one piece. Let's reinsert this into the stock. Grab your stock, slide it right back in, just push it in evenly. Push down on it, drop in your bolts. Okay, it's back together. Let's go ahead and test the trigger pull. Got a snap cap, trigger gauge. Let's turn it around. £4, 9.6 ounces. Let's do another test. £4, 4.3 ounces.